Now, these traits which constitute the substratum of not only a human personality, but also of human behavior in society, the society at large. They form the substratum of all the ideas, beliefs and sentiments and value system and the festivals. If you go into the details, into the deeply into the origin of these festivals and that we have in India, after every 15 kilometers you have a difference in temperament and taste. But at the basis of all these variety of, we call it a variety of culture. Actually, culture, the diversity of culture has that uniform thread running as a basis. And what is that? That is a very interesting phenomena which Nachiketa also asked Yama in Kathopanishad. You know that famous story of Nachiketa. He went to the door of the Lord of Death and he was given 3 boons. Of those 3 boons, the last boon was what happens to man when he dies. As I told in the beginning, the culture, the mental part or the psychological part or the metaphysical part of any culture is decided by what the concept of man is in that culture. The ancient Greek culture, they also raised this question, man, know thyself, but they stopped halfway. Of course, Jesus did say, I and the Father in heaven are one, love thy neighbor as thyself. Why should I love my neighbor as myself? Because in Vedanta we already had that statement, I and the self, myself and the self of my neighbor is one and the same. I am Atma Brahma, Tattvamasi Shvetaketo. These are the 2 of the 4 Mahavakyas that we come across in the Upanishads. Now, a very big question, a very big doubt arises as to if all this is he himself, that is Brahman, how am I going to eat my food? Am I eating Brahman? How am I going to drink water? Shall I drink Brahman? It is very difficult to live with this idea. If all this is Brahman, manifestation, a divine manifestation, then how to live in the world? The second line of this, the first verse of the Isha Upanishad, which says, Ishavasyamidam sarvam yat kincha jagatyam jagat tena tyaktena bhunjitha magridha kasya siddhanam. It is a complete methodology in itself, how to live life in this world, knowing fully well that everything in this world is a divine manifestation. The next question would be how to live in this world. Then the answer given is tena tyaktena bhunjitha, live with a sense of detachment. How do we get attached to the world? Because this instrument of body, mind and intellect, which is called a human being, this instrument is like an iron nail which is attracted by the world like a magnet, but this instrument is permeated by spirit, Isha. So, this Jagat which is ever changing, this external nature which is ever changing is permeated by that spirit. This matter, this material world is permeated by spirit. Now, what does it lead to? It leads to the conclusion, matter and spirit are 2 sides of the same coin. They appear different, flagrantly opposite, but they are 2 sides of the same coin. They are complementary to each other. By the way, this complementarity of opposites is not only the foundation of our culture, but also of modern science. You know, when scientists wanted to know the same question which Shaunak asked Angiras, what is that by knowing which everything else becomes known, the scientists are also trying to find out what is that which is responsible for giving mass to the whole visible universe, and they have come out with the answer, it is God particle or Higgs boson. The sages said it is Brahman, and they use the term, the neutral gender it. And how do we prove that this material, this table is made of, and we call it inert, this inert wood, it does not talk, it does not speak, but The Upanishad says, our cultural tradition says, the Upanishad is the sort of an authority of Indian culture. It says it is all a divine manifestation. Again this dilemma will arise in our homes. Our young children will ask, what is the scientific evidence? And here comes the blessing of modern science. It is modern science which proved, experimentally proved, after J.C. Bose, Jagdish Chandra Bose, whose experiments I narrated in the very beginning. There was another experiment conducted by scientists, which is known as double slit experiment. Now, I will tell you in a very oversimplified way what that double slit experiment was, which proved that the so called inert material that we call as dead matter or a stone is not dead, it is conscious. I am reminded of a very famous poem by a Hindi poet, Jaishankar Prasad. He wrote an epic poem named Kamayani, and Kamayani started with this assumption: नीचे जल था, ऊपर हिम था, एक तरल था, एक सघन, एक तत्व की ही प्रधानता, कहो उसे जड़ या चेतन. The substance of this line beginning is that the material and spiritual are one and the same. You call it jad, animate, or inanimate, or chetan, animate, it is one and the same thing. And this epic poem ends with the same statement: समरस्थे जड़या चेतन, सुंदर साकार बना था, चेतनता एक विलसती, आनंद अखंड घना था. There was one consciousness of which there is no plural, and this is precisely the summum bonum or the central theme of Schrödinger's two famous lectures, What is Life, Mind and Matter, published by the Cambridge University. In his epilogue on determinism and free will, Schrödinger states clearly, as if it is a translation of Prasad's poem Kamayani, consciousness is a singular of which plural is not known. Chetanata eka vilasati, ananda akhanda ghana tha. See how modern scientists, Schrödinger, Erwin Schrödinger, to whom we owe that wave equation, we teach physics, modern, it is a textbook knowledge of what Schrödinger's contribution is enormous, just as Bohr's and Einstein's. So, this concept of the animate and inanimate is only for our convenience. There is nothing inanimate in this world, that is what the Upanishad says, and that is what modern scientists also say. And the Upanishad says, but you can conveniently say, look, I am a Muslim, I do not believe in your Upanishads. Where is the scientific evidence? So, here comes the credit to the scientist. They conducted this experiment and experimentally proved that the so called jad, the metal, the stone on the roadside or a metal sheet, it is not jad, it is not inanimate, it is also inanimate. And this double slit experiment I will try to explain a bit. You see, what they did was, when the scientists wanted to know the ultimate truth about this world, that is visible world around us, they discovered that these millions of species in the material, in the mineral, animal and vegetable kingdom, they are a result of permutation and combination of 92 naturally occurring substances. From hydrogen to uranium, as we teach to the 9th class students in the periodic table, we have 92 naturally occurring substances. So, from millions of species we have come down to 92. Now, the scientists were not satisfied, they tried to see deeper, and what they observed is that these elements, each element is composed of 3 basic particles or fundamental particles or building blocks, namely electrons, protons and neutrons. And as late as 1911, Lord Rutherford in England, he experimentally demonstrated that the atom of these elements is largely space, and almost the entire mass of the atom is concentrated in the middle, known as the nucleus, which is positively charged. When nucleus was broken, there was a Pandora box opening, and we have now almost more than 200 so called elementary particles. So, in search for that particle which is responsible for giving rise to this multiplicity of nature that we see around us, we ended up with 200. Then of course, I mean, to cut the story short, they were reduced to 2. They were either bosons or fermions. Boson, incidentally, in honor of Professor Satyendranath Bose, an Indian scientist, and Enrico Fermi was an Italian scientist, and in honor of these two scientists, we have these particles reduced to bosons and fermions, but we still are looking for that one which is responsible for giving rise to this multifoldness of nature. Now, these two have not been so far. We have these three, let us for all practical purposes, we have these three fundamental particles, electrons, protons and neutrons. Then there was another scientist, de Broglie, Louis de Broglie. He said that these particles are not particles in the sense we understand by the term particle. Particle means something small, solid, occupying a very small space. That is what we understand by particle. He proved that these particles are not solid, they are solid particles, no doubt, but they can also behave like waves. Now, the particulate nature and wave nature are flagrantly opposite to each other. Einstein could never reconcile. Here came Niels Bohr in 1927 in a city called Como in Italy. He gave that historic lecture. It was a public lecture in September 1927 in Como, where he formulated for the first time that the opposites are not contradictory, they are complementary. And mind you, if you go through the commentary of Ishopanishad by Sri Aurobindo, he also says the principle it follows throughout is an uncompromising reconciliation of uncompromising extremes. So, complementarity of opposites is not only the foundation of modern science, but also of Indian cultural tradition as enunciated by the Ishopanishad. And Sri Aurobindo has enumerated 9 pairs of opposites. In the very first verse of the Ishopanishad, we have 2 contradictions. One is Jagat, ever changing, and Isha, never changing. This ever changing Jagat, this external nature is never changing. How do you reconcile? Then the second line, Tene tyaktene bhunjitha, enjoy with a sense of renunciation. Now, enjoyment and renunciation, apparently they are opposite to each other, but they are complementary. Like that, you have so many in the Upanishads, the entire Upanishadic literature you have. In the Kathopanishad, you come across the Anoraniyan Mahto Mahiyan. It is smaller than the smallest as well as bigger than the biggest. And these Bohr-Einstein debate about the wave particle duality, particle is smaller than the smallest. When electron is a particle, it is smaller than the smallest. When it is a wave in the abstract mathematical space, it extends to infinity, bigger than the biggest. So, Heisenberg paid a secret visit to India, and he visited Tagore, another Nobel laureate, and he said, look, we are facing with this dilemma, whether electron is a particle, or it is a wave, it is both. Tagore said, look, we have no problem. He immediately quoted Kathopanishad, where it is clearly stated, Anoraniyan Mahto Mahiyan. He is smaller than the smallest, he is bigger than the biggest. We go back to that old story of Yamaraj and Yam and Nachiketa, where Nachiketa asked Yam, O Lord of Death, you are the most qualified person to answer my question. What happens to a man when he dies? Yam was very much disturbed. He said, even great rishis do not know the answer to this question. You have the whole kingdom of the heaven, kingdom of earth, you have 1000-year-old sons and daughters and grandsons and great grandsons, please do not ask this question. Nachiketa said, look, if you do not want to answer this question, I do not mind, but I am not going to be satisfied with all your you are offering me. Then Yam realized that the boy means business. He said, you are very intelligent. Actually, you do not want to know what happens to a man when he dies. What you want to know is what is the ultimate truth of this external nature which is visible, and of the ultimate truth of man himself. And then in 1/4 of a sentence he said, Om Ityetad. What you want to know is Om, and the whole of the rest of the Upanishad is an explanation of that term Om. Now, what is this Om? This Om is known by various names, Pranav and what not. There are so many Upanishads regarding Om, and this Om was given, is perhaps the closest representation of that ultimate truth, Brahman, as we call it Brahman. The grammarians call it Shabd Brahman, the musicians call it Nad Brahman. Nad Brahman as such does not, this term, this combined term does not occur in any of the Upanishads or in our scriptures, but Nad itself and Brahman another independent term. But this combined term Nad Brahman is perhaps one of the ways of salvation through music, not only through philosophy, but also through music. The entire musical system, the art, music as you know is one of the arts, the sculpture, painting, music and dance. These are normally the 4 branches of art, and at the base of all these art, Indian art, is the sound. In the case of music, it is the sound symbol Om, by which you can realize your own self. There are only 2 examples in human history where we know for sure that in the north Swami Haridas, the guru of Tansen, and in the south Saint Tyagaraj, who realized Brahman through music. So, that is why it is known as the also known as Brahmananda Sahodar. The bliss that we obtain from music is as good as Brahmananda. It is the brother of bliss of Brahman. Now, what is about this Om or the music, we shall consider a little more in detail. What is Om? As I said earlier, it is the closest we can go to Brahman, and when we go to describe the bliss, the inner bliss through the sound of Om, we realize that this is the undifferentiated ones. Sound, when supposing I produce a sound here, when as I am speaking and you are hearing, what is the mechanism by which this sound travels? This Om generates from within myself. The sound exists in 4 states, as you can see from any textbook on Indian music, that it is Vaikhari, Madhyama, Paschanti and Para. So, when an Adi Yogi, a person who tries to realize himself through music, he produces some music, the origin is from Para sound, and then it passes through Paschanti and Madhyama and then Vaikhari. So, what you hear is Vaikhari, Om. Now, Om, as it travels, as I speak and it travels into your ears, when Om or any other musical sound for that matter, we will come to Om later on, but supposing I produce some music from within myself, then from Para it will comes to Vaikhari. Now, it has to pass through my whole personality. Supposing I am a person who is interested in music, but I am full with lust, greed, anger, envy and so many devilish tendencies which have been described in the 16th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, then that sound of Om will, the energy associated with the sound of Om will be changed. It will never remain divine and sattvic as it had originally come from a person like Swami Haridas or Saint Tyagaraj. When Haridas produced a music, it passed through a sattvic region, a sattvic tunnel, and when it reaches the ear of the listener also has a body mind intellect complex. He also has a mind which may be sattvic, which may be rajasic, which may be tamasic. It may be full of divine traits, it may be full of devilish tendencies. So, when the music produced by a Haridas or a Tyagaraja reaches a person who is equally pure, then there is a resonance. Now, what is resonance? Let me explain a bit. Supposing this is a pen. Now, if I strike this pen like this, it will vibrate. That is called its natural frequency. So, every object in this world has a natural frequency. So, when the superimposed frequency matches exactly with the natural frequency, there is a resonance and the amplitude becomes very high, and theoretically it can become infinite. What does it mean? It means if the producer of music, that is the singer, the performer and the listener, they are both of sattvic nature like Swami Haridas or Sant Tyagaraja, they both will be elevated to infinite heights and both will enjoy Brahmananda. That is why Indian music is called Muktidayakam Naturanjakam. It is meant for liberation, for salvation, not for entertainment. Entertainment, of course, good music does entertain, but that is not the primary aim of Indian classical music. The primary aim is self realization or God realization. So, that is the summum bonum of not only Indian classical music, but Indian culture as a whole. Self realization, that is the touchstone on which you can judge any culture. You see, the material aspect of any culture is entirely different, but the culture is judged from the mental aspect, the philosophical aspect. What sort of a philosophical legacy we have inherited from the Vedic rishis? Is it relevant today? Yes, it is relevant today. You see the Bhagavad Gita, it is full of management, how to manage a corporate sector. These days you hear so many exponents of the Bhagavad Gita, Tilak, Swami Ranganathananji, Swami Chinmayananji, Dr. Radhakrishnan, and you read any Vedic commentary and you will find even today the Bhagavad Gita is relevant not only to the corporate sector, not only to a housewife, not only to a student, but to every one of us, irrespective of caste, creed, religion or any other thing. That is the beauty of Indian culture. So, how we have to maintain it, how we have to an ordinary person, a man in the street, what he has to do to imbibe those values, those ideas that we have inherited from the great rishis. Swami Vivekananda has beautifully summarized these, the summum bonum, these if you summarize the whole basics of Indian culture, you can say, he said, each soul is potentially divine. The first point that Swamiji stressed was, believe in the potential divinity of yourself. You are not a sinner, and see his courage and conviction. 100 years, more than 100 years ago, he proclaimed this to the Western audience in USA, in European countries, when there was a lot of dogmatism. Christianity was having so many Christian Orthodox Church was against him, and there he proclaimed, because he was a realized soul, he said, each soul is potentially divine. The goal is to manifest this divinity within by controlling nature, external and internal. What do we mean by controlling nature, external and internal? As I said earlier, external nature is our day to day life. We have to deal with our job, our family, our friends and relatives, all environment that we have around us. That does not mean that when we said ahimsa or non-violence, and as I said, enumerated the various characteristics of dharma, Ahimsa was one of them, non-violence was one of them. That does not mean that you should not kill mosquitoes. These days we have a lot of dengue and lot of bugs which harm us, which kill us. Even a judge gives a capital punishment to a murderer, to a rapist. Recently we had it in Delhi. But what is the difference? It does not mean that this mosquito or a bug or a rapist or a murderer is not a manifestation of divine. It is. Even a particle of dust on the road, a worm in the drain, a Barack Obama in the White House, they are all divine manifestations. But how do they differ? They differ in the degree of manifestation of that divinity. When we say it is all divine manifestation, and but still we kill a mosquito, what is the difference? The difference is because we kill a mosquito not out of anger or hatred. That is the key. We give a capital punishment, the judge does not have any anger or hatred for the rapist or for the murderer. So, there we have to use our vivek, our discrimination, our power, our buddhi, right. So, we have this. Swamiji summarized our culture. The main points of our Indian culture are: we have to control nature external. Controlling nature external means does not mean that we have to walk in bullock carts. We have to use aeroplanes, we have to use fast trains, we have to use all modern equipment, electricity and all that, nuclear energy and what not. But we have to see that we make similar advances in our internal nature also. There is a vast unexplored world within us, and if we do not make researches, advancements in our inner world, all advancements made in the outer world, in the nature external, they are going to lead to disaster. Definitely they will lead to disaster. But at the same time he cautioned, do not look for otherworldliness only. So, what constitutes the stabilizing factor of a society? A fusion of researches, advancements in the outer world, that is Abhyudaya, and inner world, that is Nishreyas. So, if a fusion of the two, that should constitute the stabilizing factor of a society, and that is what Swamiji meant by controlling nature external and internal. Now, how can we do it? How to do it? He said, do this either by work, that is karma yoga, by knowledge or worship or psychic control or philosophy, by one or more or all of these, and be free. So, freedom from attachment to the world. Who gets attached? My body, mind, intellect complex. This is the complex which gets attached to the world. And where do I have to get from which do I have to get freedom from? Freedom from attachment, not freedom from the world. I do not have to leave the world. Freedom does not mean that. Freedom means you have to, what do you have to renounce? When the Ishopanishad says tena tyaktena bhunjitha, that does not mean that you do not do useful work in the society, because you will be bound by the fruit of your actions. No, you have to get attached to your work, put your heart and soul in what you are doing, but do not get attached to the fruit of action. That is called detachment, not detachment to the work as such. Even in Bodhicharya avatar, he says, karmaiva tu sukham yasya nishkarma sa sukhi katham. Doing action itself should be your sukha, that should give you the pleasure, not the fruit of action. Forget about the fruit of action, because you have no control over the fruit of action. That is the real import of when Krishna says karmanyeva adhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana. How can you work without attachment, without any fruit in the mind? You have the fruit in the mind, you have the result in the mind, but do not be attached to the result that you have in the mind. Let the result be anything. You start with a noble cause, that is the emblem of Ramakrishna Mission and Mutt, Atmano mokshartham jagat hitaya cha, for your own salvation as well as Bahujan hitaya, Bahujan sukhaya. Buddha also said it, for the loka sangraha, for the benefit of all. So, that is not forbidden, that is not discouraged. Get in, put your heart and soul, whatever you do, that is the karma yoga, but many people give this argument, how can you attach yourself in any action without attaching yourself to the fruit of action? You can do it. As I give you an example, when you kill a mosquito, you do not kill out of anger or hatred. So, you can always do good actions without getting attached to the fruit of action. And then you can do in as many ways. There are four major ways: Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga and Raj Yoga, as you have said earlier. But then, as I asked this question in one of the conferences on the Bhagavad Gita. There are 18 chapters in the Bhagavad Gita, and every chapter is a yoga. Arjuna Vishad Yogo Nam Prathamodhyaya, Moksha Sannyas Yogo Nam Ashtadashodhyaya. So, there are 18 yogas, and you say, Swamiji, there are only 4 yogas. So, Ramakrishna Paramahansa solved this problem beautifully. He said, Jato mat tato path, as many pathways as the number of people on this planet. So, do not be scared of these names Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga and Raj Yoga or any other yoga. Even Vishad Yoga is a yoga. What if you should understand the basic implication of the term yoga? Yoga is that which joins you, which inspires you to the divine. Even a Vishad, you see, Einstein had a great Vishad. I remember Professor D.S. Kothari, who was the chairman of the University Grants Commission and the first scientific advisor to the government of India. He happened to be my neighbor, and I used to have a 1-hour satsang with him. So, then one day he said, Einstein also had a similar Vishad as Arjun had in the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, and it was because of that Vishad that Einstein could think of relativity. He actually saw relativity, and there is a beautiful quotation given in the publication by Indian National Science Academy on Einstein. I think it was published in 1978, I am forgetting the year. But then there Professor Kothari has written an article on Einstein, and there he has quoted that in Einstein's own words, how frustrated, how disgusted he was, as disgusted and as frustrated as Arjun was in the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. So, Vishad is also necessary for joining you with the divine. So, every chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is given the title yoga. Mind you, the term yoga is very much misunderstood these days. Every Tom, Dick and Harry is running a school on yoga, and they have the first blunder they commit is they pronounce yoga as yoga. Yoga is yoga, please don't make it yoga. Anyway, that is by the way. So, yoga is that which makes you free from the attachment to the world, that is yoga. Now, he says this is the whole of religion. Doctrines or dogmas or rituals or books or temples or forms are but secondary details. Mind you, he has not condemned them. He says they are secondary details. They are truths, but they are lower truths. You move from truth to truth, from a lower truth to a higher truth. Water is a liquid at room temperature. This is a truth, but it is made of 2 gases, oxygen and hydrogen. Howsoever oxygen you may inhale, how much of hydrogen you may inhale, your thirst will not be quenched. This is a higher truth, and which is a still higher truth is that oxygen and hydrogen, they are constituted by electrons, protons and neutrons, and none of them is combustible or supporter of combustion. What are electrons, protons and neutrons? They are field concretized. So, we are moving from truth to truth, from a lower truth to a higher truth. We never move from error to truth. Therefore, he justified even idol worship. When you salute the national flag, you do not salute a piece of cloth. When you worship an idol made of wood or iron or stone, you are not worshipping that wood or iron or stone, you are worshipping your Ishta, your idol, the God Almighty. Call him God or Brahman or Devi or Saraswati or Durga or Santoshi Ma, whatever. So, that is what was the secular vision of Swami Vivekananda Ramakrishna Paramahansa, which now in our own time, in the contemporary world, are relevant, and they have been inherited directly from the Vedic rishis. This is the beauty of Indian culture, that it is vibrant even today. Thank you.